So today we're diving into a theological text that makes a pretty bold claim. It argues that for almost 1,700 years, a huge piece of the Christian gospel has been missing, just gone from mainstream belief. And its entire argument really zeroes in on one specific person from the Bible.
Right, so our source text kicks things off with a figure you've probably heard of, Joseph of Arimathea. You know, the man who buried Jesus. The sermon we're looking at holds him up as this perfect example, this antitype, which is basically a fancy word for a blueprint of a very specific kind of believer, one with a really courageous and maybe different understanding of faith.
So why Joseph? What's so special about him? Well, according to this text, it's not just that he was brave enough to go ask for Jesus' body. The argument is that he understood something really fundamental that many others have missed, that Jesus took on the sins of the world not just on the cross, but actually before that, at his baptism.
And the sermon argues that everything Joseph did, standing up to the authorities, risking his entire reputation, it was all a direct result of this deeper faith. He wasn't scared of what people could do to him because he believed in the complete picture of salvation, which started at the baptism. This connection, this link between what you believe and how brave you can be, is absolutely central to the sermon's whole message.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. The sermon uses Joseph as a launchpad to draw a very powerful and, you could say, controversial line in the sand. It argues that inside Christianity, it's not just about different denominations. Nope, it claims there are two fundamentally different types of believers.
And wow, this source does not pull any punches. It splits believers into these two camps, people of faith and religious practitioners. The first group, it says, is truly born again because they get it. They believe in the baptism and the cross, and that's what washes their sins away. But the second group, they focus only on the cross. And according to this sermon, that's just not enough. It means their sins are still there, making them part of a worldly religion instead of what it calls the invisible church.
So what is this invisible church? Well, the sermon defines it as this group of true believers, but it's not a building you can go to or an organization you can join. It's a spiritual gathering of people who hold this very specific belief about the baptism and the cross being linked. And who's in it? The text says only God really knows.
Okay, but this raises a massive question, right? If this whole two-part gospel thing is the actual key to salvation, why on earth do most Christian creeds today focus almost completely on the cross? Well, the sermon has a pretty dramatic historical answer for that.
The sermon's answer is that this widespread confusion isn't some accident of history. It was, according to this source, intentional. And it alleges that the whole thing can be traced back to one single game-changing event that happened almost 1,700 years ago.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This text is claiming that a fundamental theological mistake has been passed down, shaping the faith of billions of people for over 1,700 years. So, what happened all that time ago? Okay, so here's the timeline according to the sermon. It claims the early church had it right. They believed salvation came through both Jesus' baptism and his death. But then, in the year 325, at the famous Council of Nicaea, everything changed. The Nicene Creed was written, and, this is the key part, the whole doctrine about Jesus' baptism taking on sin was just left out. Then, centuries later, the Protestant Reformation inherited that same creed, and the sermon says, never fixed the omission. So why would they do that? Why leave it out? The sermon points the finger squarely at the Roman Emperor Constantine. It claims he was a polytheist who really just wanted to unite his empire. A savior who takes on sins at baptism? Well, that's a pretty exclusive idea. So by dropping that part and focusing only on the crucifixion, he made Christianity a lot more compatible with other Roman beliefs. In effect, the source says, turning it into just another worldly religion.
All right, so after laying out what it sees as this huge historical problem, the sermon shifts gears and spends the rest of its time explaining the solution. It's what it calls the complete gospel of the water and the Spirit.
So, the crucial point according to this text is this. You can't have one without the other. The two events are totally inseparable. The baptism in the water is where Jesus legally accepts all the world's sin onto himself. Then, the crucifixion is where he pays the price for that sin. To put it another way, without the baptism, the cross is like a punishment, but the crime was never formally transferred to him. The sin had to be put on him first.
And this isn't just some dusty old debate. The sermon is very clear that this has massive, urgent implications for believers who are alive right now, today.
So the big takeaway here is that this source is making a direct challenge to modern Christianity. It's saying that the common creeds that people recite are actually incomplete, that faith in the cross by itself isn't enough, and that a brand new reformation is needed. One that puts the doctrine of Jesus' baptism back in what it claims is its original and rightful place.
So, as we wrap up our look at this material, it really leaves us with this one powerful question to chew on. No matter what you personally believe, this sermon forces you to think about history, about doctrine, and about the incredible idea of how a single decision made so long ago could potentially reshape the spiritual world for thousands of years.